Have to go through a lot.
Like his analogy there, eh? I like the fossil.
If I can continue to avoid the yeah, but I think my pitch is years ago.
Well, basically what you're saying is everybody reads the bill.
Nonetheless, it's a challenge. In fact, I just had
You read the bill and you disagree with the challenge terrorism.
Yeah, this is one of the risks.
Now you got a TS.
It's money in it. It's amazing how if you look at the impact of paint by which was just a simple piece of paper and it's certain things.
I understand that.
Blue out it. Look at a few things. If it would ever come out to the water, and they really. They all have conventions. Never ratified. The U.S. do it. He wrote that into the So it's amazing. It may not work here, and it may resonate. Yeah, I agree with that. That's why pragmatic could be jumping up and down.
Tiny little airport. That's a tiny little airport.
Yeah, half an hour. I think I picked up something else. I really have to practice what you guys do. Actually, get me started. Yeah, I've been on the board of directors for a long time. I've been too busy a lot of the time. Big projects cancel out. I said, yeah, I'll spend time with it. Next thing you know, I'm getting sucked into it.
Hillary was in the building earlier. One second, very
At the end of the day, I'd like to be introduced to the meeting. Well, he left to be here. Camille was working with this meeting. Yeah, let's look at David would be here. Lauren Shaw. I thought we'd all have names there. Make it easy. So I thought the meeting was an hour. They cut it back. I told the story. Yeah. They were live. I thought it was stuff.
Oh my God.
As opposed to the Vice President, I serve this country. Thank you very much.
How are hires you think are going on hires on the tsunami early warning?
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'd like to get started. I want to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jeff DeBelco. I direct the Environmental Change and Security Program here at the Center. And on behalf of former Congressman Lee Hamilton, our President Director at the Woodrow Wilson Center, I want to welcome you all to the formal memorial to Woodrow Wilson, where we try to bring together the worlds of scholarship and policy so I both can learn from one another and improve the endeavors of both. We are thrilled today to have Congressman Earl Blumenauer from Oregon come talk to us about what I don't think it's hyperbole to say is a truly historic piece of legislation that was signed into law last year, the Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act. Congressman Blumenauer was the primary author on the House side and worked very closely with particularly Senator Frist's office on the Senate side to bring this legislation to fruition in truly remarkable bipartisan fashion and, as I understand from people who understand the Hill much better than I, incredibly fast fashion, working in ways that we don't often necessarily see the Hill working in terms of the speed with which it was brought to bear. I'll say just a word about Congressman Blumenauer because I think many of you know that he has really devoted his entire working life to public service. First in Oregon and at the state level, but also in the city of Portland. And I think it's fair to say that he has been working hard all along many stops to bring a perspective of sustainable community to the federal level and really, in very practical ways, try to improve the United States, sustainable living, and I think in many ways we see that domestic agenda at the heart of the Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act, where he's really trying to improve the lives of people overseas with U.S. foreign assistance, as well as his strong history here domestically. As I mentioned, on December 1st, President Bush signed the Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act that authorizes the President to provide aid for promoting global access and affordable and equitable water and sanitation. It also calls for the Secretary of State to develop a detailed strategy aimed at enhancing health, economic development, poverty reduction, environmental sustainability through water and sanitation programs. As I noted, certainly passed in dramatic bipartisan fashion, but also we should take note that it's the first time, in my understanding, that a Millennium Development Goal, a particular indicator of those UN-endorsed goals, has been codified in American law. And so also a tremendous achievement. And frankly, on some of these issues, gives us a time frame that is not the typical quarterly or yearly or 2-year time frame that we think about so many of these issues in this town, which is, of course, far too short, but with a 2015 time frame, gives us an opportunity to think farther down the road. Obviously, it's a pivotal moment in terms of these water and sanitation issues. We're just at the beginning of our second international decade for action on water, the Water for Life that's 2005 to 2015. And we have coming up next month in Mexico City the 4th World Water Forum, where I hope many of you will take your lessons learned and share with the international water community. I know the Congressman has been active in some of the creative thinking that goes into that, and I'm sure that the ideas that coming from him and from the bill will be reflected there. And I think, frankly, the entrance of a number of new actors in this in a very prominent ways, such as Mark Winters here from Living Water in the faith-based community, is a new dynamic that we're working with. I should say also a broader set of development actors that are looking at the economic and the health and some of these other connections to water and sanitation that gets it out of its sectoral approach. And I think these are all encouraging things that we need to, as a community, continue and push forward and bring new partners into this effort. And that's really what Congressman Blumenauer has done with this legislation, and we look forward to hearing his thoughts about what the next steps are forward, and then as a community discussing how we can help that process in multiple ways, playing different roles. So, Congressman, I'd like to turn the floor over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us for what I hope will be a little bit of a speech, long on some communication, interaction, questions, and comments. And I would like to begin by expressing my appreciation to the Woodrow Wilson Center for being such a great convener. We've had fascinating sessions here in the past talking about livable communities and the relationship with the federal government. Before Katrina, we were able to convene here a session on disasters. Natural and man-made, how we prevent them, how we plan for them, how we recover, where we're going. And we've also had a post-Katrina session that the Woodrow Wilson Center has been involved with. And I think it's exactly this role that brings together the tremendous resources here in our nation's capital in ways that we can get people discussing problems before they happen, looking in ways to explore issues safely in a nonpartisan, maybe even a non-political fashion. It's what used to happen legislatively. I long for the day when that happens again. But unless and until it does, it means conversations like this are so very, very important. My special thanks to Lee Hamilton, with whom I was privileged to serve too short a time, but he continues to make contributions in many exciting ways. What I would like to do is talk for a moment about why we need to do this. Now, there are a number of you who could give this presentation far better than I. You got to this point before I did. You know it in greater depth and detail. But what I find is that we must lose no opportunity to drive home why struggling to provide access to safe drinking water, deal with sanitation, is a critical national and international problem. We've got to get this wrapped down. We ought to have no opportunity slip by where we don't drive the 4 or 5 points, our 4 or 5 points, the ones that motivate each and every one of us. And frankly, I'd appreciate your critique of my pitch because I want to make, some of you know, I never give the same speech twice. I hated it. I bore myself, let alone what happens to somebody who may be subjected to the same thing. I enjoy the process that one goes through. But all the experts tell you that you've got to drive these points home, and when you get to the point where you think your audience is sick of it, maybe you're breaking through. And we haven't broken through yet about the criticality of these issues. Water is central for life, but it is not central to policy making. Those of you who are experienced with water law in the United States, the bizarre system that we have for allocating the essence of life that has profound effects on the environment, on the economy. How would we design, how would you explain how we allocate water in this country? If you were going to start from scratch to end up where we are today, under torture with computers and really smart people, could you create a patchwork, goofy system like we've got? No, you can't. And pricing of water is probably the most profound manifestation of how goofy all this stuff is. It is by turns insane, incomprehensible, and obscene how water is allocated, the value is allocated in this country. There are riots over metering, not just in some developing country. I mean, we still don't have water meters in Sacramento, New York City. Some of you are familiar with Mayor Shirley Franklin's tough love for water in Atlanta. We don't have it right in this country. My first experience with some of this up close and personal was as a public works commissioner for the city of Portland for 10 years. And some of you are more familiar with my work in transportation, but water was in this and trying to deal with decades long of neglect with combined sewer overflows and stuff I won't bore you with. But I have a profound memory, this forever emblazoned in my mind, of just sort of the insanity. We were in a hearing, and a constituent, well-meaning, frustrated constituent, exploded with anger that the rate we were going, what they were going to be charged for water and sewer and stormwater services were going to be as much as cable television. They could see the day coming. MTV, cholera. I could get the point. Yet, I'm going to be getting on a plane to go back home on my 4,600-mile-a-week commute to Portland. And I will pass people paying 6 times the price of the most expensive gasoline in the country for a bottle of water to take on a plane. God does give it to us for free, but doesn't provide the pipes, the treatment. And we've got somehow here to do a better job of driving home the point in our country of what are the costs and consequences. And then think about where we are around the world. Because it is the poor who are paying the price most horrifically for nature's failure to put the water exactly where it might be needed by people at a particular time. The poor pay a horrible price of pollution from inadequate or non-existent sanitation. Poor people around the world today are paying far more than they can comfortably afford for poorly treated, foul-tasting water that's delivered in delivery trucks. There are poor people in Bangladesh, who are paying by slowly going blind because they're drinking water tainted with arsenic. And who knows the price that is being paid by millions of people who are leaving their village to go in search of safe drinking water. I used to think those pictures in the documentaries and in National Geographic with the water jug on the head, that it was somehow sort of an exotic view. But now to me, it's the face of misplaced effort. It's the face of poverty. Even danger, as we know, is subjected to many young women who are that are actually at risk as they venture forth for hours a day. It's a picture of lost opportunity. For daughters who are gathering water are not being educated. And we need to figure out how each of us conveys that message, that this is the preventable tragedy of our time. We'll spend an hour. How many poor children will die needlessly from waterborne disease? 200, 300 in the course of the hour? We know that today half the people who are sick right now around the world are sick needlessly from waterborne disease. And the scale of death each year is staggering, not just that child every 15 seconds. And part of it that is so frustrating is that it is all within our power to stop. It's unlike the AIDS epidemic or other things that are where it's not grotesquely expensive, it's not ideological. We're bringing together, and part of the reason the legislation did come together very quickly is because some of the most conservative members of Congress, some who would describe themselves as perhaps a little more liberal or progressive, red state, blue state, people of faith, the environmental community, public health. It was an amazing coalition of people that came together who often don't agree on the major issues of our day. And they were all aligned on this. And the solutions are not ideological. Any church group, any Boy Scout troop can go to villages around the world and make the fix. They know what to do. They can do it. There are people here who will show you pictures. And on a global scale, the estimates are for what Europeans spend this year for perfume. I gave a similar speech Friday to the Metropolitan Water District in L.A., and God love them, they're convening a large group in anticipation of moving to Mexico City for the global conversation. And it was a terrific, terrific event. And the example I used there, since I was in L.A., was what Americans will spend this year on elective cosmetic surgery. This is something that we can afford. And we all have examples of the transformational effect when we push just a little bit of what it does in terms of health, in terms of productivity, in terms of education, in terms of quality of life, and the broader environment. Well, that's what drove together 186 countries in Johannesburg to adapt a real goal. It's going to be tough, but it is within our capacity to cut these numbers in half by 2015. But that means 230,000 people a day have to get access to safe drinking water. It means 400,000 people a day access to sanitation. And we're behind schedule. The world is united that that's a good idea. We've got the resources. We know how to do it. But every day that passes, we miss that goal. We're behind. And bear in mind, that's just to cut in half the people without safe drinking water and sanitation. Jeff mentioned the legislation, and it was just great. It was the best experience I've had in 10 years in Congress to watch a broad coalition come together, focus on it. We had support and encouragement from the administration, from people on both sides of the aisle, NGOs, a number of you here in this room. The two dates that I'm focused on are 2015, when the clock is ticking and we've made this global commitment. The other is June 1st, 6 months into the legislation, when the first benchmark, having a plan in place. It's not that the federal government hasn't been doing anything, but we counted up, I think, Judah, we had 15 different agencies that we found scattered across the federal government, well-intended people, but there wasn't a coordinated, consistent strategy. And sometimes other goals intervened that at least were deserving of reconsideration. Because even in the small amount of money that we had, $100 million, only $7 million went to sub-Saharan Africa. We've got to get, on the federal level, we really need to get our act together. Congress needs to focus, and I think this legislation helps. I'm particularly indebted to my chairman, Congressman Henry Hyde, who willed this through, who had hearings, had great staff support, and who is, I truly think it's part of his legacies to try and help people around the world. He is really pro-life in a very broad sense, and it includes dealing with this problem. Senator Frisk came back from a trip to Africa last year, and I think this was the first bill that he introduced in the Senate. And Senator Reid, his counterpart as the Democratic leader, co-sponsored it. And they both were instrumental in streamlining the process through the Senate. We've got some challenges ahead of us now. We need, part of the problem, I'll admit, Congress sort of is all over the map on this stuff, making the job of our friends in the administration difficult. We want Congress to get its act together. And we want to avoid some of the problems with congressional earmarks and conflicting signals that are sent by them. There's a real problem that my heart goes out to the folks in the State Department, because they've been given a task, an important task, one that I'm convinced that they willingly accept, and they are supportive of the overall goals, but this isn't simple. There's a lot of moving parts just in the federal government right now. And to be able to come forward with a comprehensible strategy within this time frame is not simple. And I'm hopeful that we all, whether we're in Congress or people in the NGO community, can be all having our thinking cap on and finding ways that we can offer up suggestions and ideas, that we narrow in what we think makes a difference. There's a lot of expertise just in this room that could play an invaluable role in moving this discussion forward. I see the strategy by June 1st, the first step, but it's not going to be the final word, and there's going to be a lot of refinement and development and work that we need to take. I am hopeful that this broad coalition of people who care about meeting this challenge will continue working with us on implementation. There's a role for all of us to play, and I am hopeful that we're going to be able to harness the energy, extend the story, look creatively, because this, to me, ties together a whole host of objectives. I mean, part of it is just the needless suffering, poverty, loss of life, and disruption on a global level. But I will tell you that I also think our being able to craft alternatives internationally and focus and fund and implement them are going to help us with water in this country. Maybe we can find a way for New Mexico to stop suing Texas, or is it Texas that's suing New Mexico? Actually, they're probably both suing each other over scarce water. 6 of the 7 fastest growing states are water stressed. We don't have our story straight here. 1,000 communities are dealing with combined sewer overflow. And funding is woefully inadequate nationally. And every community that I visit, I go someplace every month working on other aspects of livable communities. I have yet to visit a community that isn't concerned about stormwater, sanitation, safe drinking water, issues of equity, and long-term supply. So we're kind of in this together. And actually, you know, we can be concerned about the developing world. I'm concerned about the future of Las Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta. This comes very close to home in this country. Last, but by no means least, the spirit of cooperation on a bipartisan, relatively non-ideological basis that helped us craft and pass this legislation overwhelmingly. I think water can sort of help us resolve conflicts, not just globally. I think this is a model for how Congress ought to be operating now, where men and women of good faith pick serious subjects and sit down and work with certified smart people and figure out solutions that are not particularly combative. They're not going to get the headlines. I mean, you'll look in vain to find news accounts for what you helped make possible, even though it's going to save millions of lives, even though it can help in terms of conflict resolution, even though it's the largest environmental issue in an immediate sense, more so than global warming, because it's just, you know, it's not something that is going to make the talk shows and the shouting heads on Sunday television, unless they're going to talk about the failure, the breakdown, the death, or a particular incident. But I think working together, we can have a model that really will make a difference in terms of how the political process works. Well, I can go on at greater length, but I would rather not, because we've got, as I mentioned, I appreciate all the horsepower that's in the room. If there's an opportunity for observations that people would care to offer up, I'm very interested in it. Judah Ariel, who was the author of all this stuff and who has dealt with a number of you, is here to answer the tough questions or help make sure that we don't lose track of your good ideas. So, Jeff.
Terrific. Well, no, thank you very much, Congressman. I very much appreciate it. It's given us a terrific perspective on your thinking and how you came to this and where you see it going. I agree with you that we have a lot of excellent expertise in the room. And so we want to turn to a discussion period where I want to make sure, because we do have a lot of good folks, that people make quick points or ask quick questions and don't make speeches. I'll ask you to do that, and second, for you to tell us who you are and where you're coming from, and then I'll ask you really to focus on questions from your experience, whether it's an NGO and a policy analysis, whether it's an NGO and service delivery, or a foundation, or the private sector, or a multilateral financial institution, the government, what you see working and what you see not working. Because I think as we move forward, there are lots of things that we know how to do and can do this, and more resources and more capacity in this country, and particularly in the communities that we're talking about, will really make a difference. But I do think there are a lot of things that don't necessarily work so well or work like we think they do, or they don't work everywhere. And so part of what I think will be helpful, certainly to the Congressman, as he pushes it on the Hill, but also our folks at the State Department and within the government who are really trying to develop a comprehensive strategy and look at what they have been doing and look at ways to improve it, is that really focusing on what works, that has evidence to back that up in terms of demonstrated over time, and that also is very useful in bringing in other partners to the game by demonstrating links, whether it's to the economics, whether it's to the health, whether it's to education, and broadening the groups that we have around the table. And I think that's reflected here. But I think in some ways what we as a community have not done well enough is bring that together to be able to not only tell the emotional story, the story that emphasizes the importance in terms of human welfare, but also convinces some of the finance ministries that, frankly, on the bottom line, economically, this is in their interest, and likewise in the education ministries and health ministries. And I think that will really help us take these next steps. So I urge you to try to focus some of your points and comments on that as we engage in dialogue. So who would like to kick us off? Yes, if you could tell us who you are, sir.
Yes, hi, I'm Tim Forsman with...
I ask you to use a mic because we do have a web audience that's watching us live, and then this will be archived on the website, so we want to capture your question.
Hello to my mother, it's Valentine's Day. My name's Tim Forsman, I'm with Global Water. Thank you very much, Congressman. A real quick question has to do with the State Department. You showed an emphasis on that. Well, since John Turner left, they haven't had the stability in the State Department that might be needed. So the quick question is, what might we do as a group to assist them at this time when they're not at full strength on this critical issue? And then second, groups like the Global Water Alliance, that some may know about it, how should they best spend their time in leveraging private-public partnerships? Should it be with the State Department, or should they spend half their time with Congress also? Thank you very much.
Well, I've not yet met with the Assistant Secretary Designate, Ms. McMurray. I'm looking forward to doing that. But there is no gap. There's been some turnover, but we have a person in place to be able to focus on and with. And I would anticipate that the extent to which those of you around the table have some constructive suggestions about what works, things that you're concerned about, offering them to both the executive and the legislative branch. My goal is to make this seamless. This, I think, is one area where there needn't be unnecessary divisions or conflict. We're all, I think, moving in the same direction. There may be some modest difference of opinion on some areas of staging or prioritization, but frankly, my sense is that those areas of difference are largely ones of resource allocation, and some conflicting priorities where, for instance, we may see some things from Capitol Hill that might be different from what's in the State Department or other federal agencies, but they're brought about by lack of clarity and priority on this issue. I am convinced that this legislation will help us remedy the resource problem for water. I think we will make some significant additional investments. We saw this last year that the amount doubled, and admittedly $200 million is far short of what we all know is necessary and possible. But in this climate, in that Congress, that was a not insignificant increase. And I think the more that we're working together on how to achieve this in a cooperative and collaborative fashion, I think it minimizes conflicts brought about by scarce resource and confusion about priority. And my personal commitment is to work as much as we possibly can to deal with the resource question and to find areas of unnecessary confusion about priority, and to get the point across to some of my brothers and sisters in Congress who haven't given this the attention that I think it's warranted. Because I think once they do, once they focus, once you help us understand, I think a lot of this prioritization falls out. And it's not just because that's going to be the smooth implementation of the bill. We are desperately in need of new leadership on this legislation. I mentioned Henry Hyde playing an invaluable role. Henry is leaving us. Senator Frist was critical on the Senate side and moving this forward. Now, he may be involved, rumor has it, politically after this year, but he's not going to be on Capitol Hill. Jim Colby, who's played a critical role on issues of foreign aid, and I have found to be a very thoughtful and determined and hard-working member of Congress, is gone. So some of the people who've been involved with this leadership are moving on. And we need to make sure that we have congressional leadership, both parties, both chambers, in a wide variety of areas to be a part of this process. Great question, too long an answer, but you touched several buttons for me.
Thank you, Congressman. In fact, your comment reminds me, I just, as a heads up, we're going to go till 2:30, at which point the Congressman needs to depart, but we have a reception upstairs where we can continue this conversation among ourselves. So, ma'am, please.
Congressman Blumenauer, I want to thank you for your good work on this legislation. It's really needed, and I'm really happy that you worked so hard for it. As you mentioned, as one of the rationales...
Tell us who you are and where you're
I'm
from.
sorry. I'm Mary Renwick. I'm with Winrock International. And in your rationale, you mentioned one of the reasons that we need to increase access to water and sanitation is because of the horrible burden lack of access places on women. Indeed, women and girls and children bear a disproportionate burden because of lack of access. They risk sexual violence when they're collecting water. They lose out on economic opportunities, educational opportunities, and so forth. And I think when we look at an implementation, I don't see a gender strategy in the legislation, nor have I heard much discussed in terms of the implementation strategy. And I think it's really important as we look at how we're going to implement this policy that we take a gender-sensitive approach. And I would highly urge you to look at a paper that I had nothing to do with authoring by the Water and Sanitation Program and IRC. It's called Linking Sustainability with Demand, Gender, and Poverty. In this paper, they did an analysis of 88...
Say that again, please.
I have a copy here, and I'll give it to you.
Okay.
We'll put it on the Wilson Center website in the summary of the meeting so everybody can access the report. So.
And the thing about this paper is that it did an analysis of 88 water supply and sanitation projects of differing technologies in 15 countries. And the things that they found out with projects that were highly successful is they were gender sensitive. That meant men and women working in equal partnership from the from the planning all the way through the implementation and ongoing management of the project. They took a pro-4 approach, and they were responsive to local demands. So that doesn't mean that as a provider we go in and say, you want water for drinking. It's letting the community decide what type of water services they want. To the poor, water is water, and historically we've tended to say, well, this is a project for drinking water, or this is water for irrigation. But to the poor, water is used for all sorts of purposes. So communities ought to be able to decide for themselves the types of services that they want, and indeed that might enhance their ability to repay the costs of different types of services, because they can use the water for small-scale gardens, small-scale enterprises, that type of thing. But in the end, I think it's very important that my bottom line point is we need to take a gender-sensitive approach as we look at implementation strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All the way in the back, the gentleman, 2 questions in the back. We'll take a couple and then let the Congressman respond. Yeah, great. Thank you. Please, sir.
Thank you, Congressman, for convening this session. My name is John Barnett. I am the Africa partner for Fedrite Exploration and Development. And I'll give you a little bit about what I'm finding on the ground in Africa. The biggest problem that we're facing is the bureaucratic delays in implementing private strategy. That is, this is very complicated, and it goes over several agencies. First, once we get in, we have to take a look at the policy. What has gotten these countries into this problem in the first place? We go back, we take a look at the tariffs, and first thing we're finding is that the corporations, which are the largest users of water, are usually paying the lowest rate. That needs to be reversed. So we go ahead and we try to restructure their bulk tariffs. Once we're able to restructure the bulk tariffs, then we can lower the tariffs for the consumers. after we structure all of this, then we have to go in and take a look at what are they doing to manage their watersheds. And here's a case in point. I can cite about 5 countries who have put in large surface water compounds, but if you take a look at what's going on in their delineated watersheds, they've got sewers and waste depots that are encroaching and actually leaching into their surface water supplies. So what we try to do is take a complete comprehensive approach and take a look at not just installing the deep water boreholes, but also leaving them with a way to manage the watersheds, and also take a look at how we can incorporate what the World Bank is currently doing. There's one thing you can put in the water supplies here, but then you have a whole infrastructure problem that you have to deal with. Well, as distribution, most of these countries, the distribution systems are approaching 50 years old. Half the treated water you put into it never makes it out. And so, and the part that does make it out, they can only collect on maybe 40% of what they can deliver to the tap. So it's a very, very complex problem in dealing with the Africa water supply. So it has got to be addressed on several levels. And the major one is breaking through these bureaucratic delays that just seems to be endemic in several of these countries. And I thank you.
Okay, if you could hand it to the gentleman right behind you. And we've had 2 very interesting interventions. We're going a little long with them, so if we could keep them shorter, just to maximize the number of perspectives we can have. Please, sir, if you could tell us who you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I've been an observer at a series of the hearings that have been held around this initiative, and I'd like to, as others have, thank the Congressman for his leadership in building a bipartisan committee, which these days is a pretty rare bird. It takes some doing, and kudos to you.
And if you could tell us who you are, sir.
I'm Ian Fitzsimmons with the Institute of International Education. You spoke a couple minutes ago about resource allocations, and I'll take this opportunity to point out something that ought to be fairly obvious. In a context where a pretty direct relationship has been established between worldwide poverty and the security threat that is now dominating U.S. thinking, when you and your brothers and sisters are responding to the budget that's been put to you that has a 7% increase in defense spending and a reduction in development spending, and where development spending is apt to go to the root cause of poverty more than defense spending is. I mean, that goes to the heart of the resource question, and I know that you all will have a lot of work to do on that. But that's, you ought to think about, in my view, what that says about U.S. priorities.
Gentleman here in the middle, and then on the outside.
My name is Daniel Miller, and I'm a representative from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a U.S. federal agency. And just very briefly, traditionally and historically, there's been a lot of emphasis on well drilling and putting in pipes and delivering the water. And what we're finding in the field, which we have a lot of experience both in terms of pilots and in terms of scaling up in developing world, is that you need interim approaches as well, such as safe water at point of use. It may be years before you have wells that are dug in the right places and you have pipes in place. And in the meantime, what do those communities do for safe water? Safe water vessels with chlorination, with packets of chlorine, bleach. There are very easy and very cheap interventions that can reduce mortality from diarrhea immediately. Secondly is there needs to be capacity building. We talk about management of systems, and ultimately we fly in, we give them our recommendations, we drill them a well, we fly out. But we need to build the capacity in communities so that they can learn to diagnose their own water and sanitation problems, learn to problem solve and solve those problems, and then maintain their ability to diagnose, because all systems break down. And thirdly, what we've learned is that it's very, very important across federal government agencies to integrate or synchronize our interventions. For example, the CDC program under the PEPFAR umbrella in Uganda is providing safe water vessels and chlorine bleach to the households in which they are screening for HIV. And we're finding that for those with HIV positive, that is part of a basic package of comprehensive care. But we're also providing it to those who are HIV negative.
I mean, just two brief comments. I appreciate the previous question about one of prioritization, and I have my own view of priorities, and I think we are underinvesting in terms of international development. And there are a variety of things, I think, that are lower priority that actually, where we would be actually making a safer and more secure world moving in this direction. But one of the reasons that water is so important goes to Mr. Miller's point about both the need for simple, direct, quick, interim, I think is the term you used, interventions that are cost effective while we're building capacity and empowering people. If we do this right, we're going to be able to do a lot of low-tech, high-impact initiatives, and a lot of you are aware of them. And these are things that aren't going to end up in a Swiss bank account. They're not going to be abused. There is an opportunity to coordinate with other public and privately funded initiatives, and they mesh together. So this plan that's coming forward from the State Department, the conversation we're having here, the change in priorities, I think this is a safe and effective way for us to be moving on a number of different fronts that's going to make it easier and clearer why we should be making these investments. And I think it's going to be largely a self-fulfilling prophecy if we do it right. And I agree with both the last 2 points, and I think this is a way to make that more likely.
Congressman Blumenauer, I'd like to refer back to the first set of remarks you made on leadership in implementing the Water for the Poor Act. The Act gives the lead role to the Department of State. And in recent years, many different agencies of the federal government have taken on water and sanitation.
Tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm very sorry. I'm Dennis Warner. I'm with Catholic Relief Services. We're a large NGO that does water and sanitation work all around the world. In recent years, many federal agencies have taken on water and sanitation roles in international development. But we don't have any single agency that is strong in the strategizing, planning, and administering of large water programs, especially if we're thinking of this in a global way, and especially if we're thinking of this in a sub-Saharan African way. I would like to know if you have any idea whether there are strong plans for strengthening the role of the State Department to have experienced and knowledgeable staff who can take on this role and provide the leadership. I know the plan calls for consultation with other stakeholders, the private sector, NGOs, other departments of the government. But if the Department of State is to have the lead role, it really needs a strong central body to take on this responsibility. Thank you.
I think your point is well taken. I plan on bringing this up with Secretary Rice when she appears before our committee in the near future. It's something that I'm looking forward to the plan that comes forward to see how we can provide the resources for the implementation of it, which and to use the plan as an opportunity to work with the various agencies that are out there that are going to continue to have a role to make sure that it's integrated. I would have felt far more comfortable in Iraq and Afghanistan if we'd had a larger role in Department of State, USAID, than some of the things that got sort of filtered out in other areas. And I think the record shows that it's, shall we say, mixed success to be charitable. This is an opportunity for us to get it right and build on what the Department of State did. It was selected deliberately. And it's something that we look forward to working both with them and with you to keep it in the spotlight, figure out how to do it right, be able to reinforce those efforts, and when they look like there's constructive criticism that's warranted or it's resources, that we work together on that. I agree with your point. I think this is a way to get it started.
Great, we have time for just two more, so I have Mark Winter and Karen Whitaker, and then we'll be able to continue the conversation over reception, so please, Mark.
Congressman, I'm Mark Winter, and I'm on the board of Living Water International and a member of the Millennium Water Alliance. And first and foremost, thank you for caring. As you mentioned in your presentation, water is life. It affects not only the obvious health implications, but also helps grow the economies. You mentioned the war situation in Iraq, hopefully bringing clean water to the needy will divert any future conflicts that we may have. And this is something that is doable and we can provide. Two or three thoughts. Number one, we're kind of doers. I don't know if I'm one of those certified smarties that you mentioned, but I don't think I am. But we have, this is living water, we have some 300 wells now in Kenya. We've provided clean water to over 1 million people, still miles and miles to travel for sure. But we have a model, and we'd like to share that model with you. We have the expense down for boring the holes and bringing the water to about $35,000 a well. We create water councils, and as I mentioned to you before your presentation, we just dedicated 2 peace wells in Kenya. President Kibaki joined us at those dedications, and this was an area where there was conflict. They call it quarrels, and there were deaths over water. So we brought these 2 wells in. We dedicated them. One of the Maasai ladies came up to me and she said, "Oh, thank you, thank you." And I thought she was talking about the water, but she's a member of the Water Council. And she told me that's the first time she ever voted on anything. And she was very, very honored and proud of that fact. The second thing is that through seeing how diverse this water issue is, a number of the NGOs, including Catholic Relief Services, were members of the Millennium Water Alliance. We have some 10 NGOs with water, specifically water expertise, that get together on a fairly regular basis. And we feel that we're creating certain efficiencies and that we're becoming more effective and that we're talking to each other and where the wells are needed and how we can bring about these wells. And we think we're getting more bang for the buck, if you will. My thought, and based on the success we've had with Millennium Water Alliance, and I just want to share this with my friends from the State Department, if there's any way that the Millennium Water Alliance and others, if we could become more or less an extension of your offices, we've collectively thought long and hard about the water needs and the water issues of the world. And we would like to share that as you develop the critical path for us come June 1st. So that is one thing that I think we can do, is form an NGO type of ad hoc committee, an extension of the State Department, and share with them our experience and our expertise. One other thing is something that we've developed over the last couple of 3 years, and that's a draft of a U.S. fund for water. Somebody was mentioning how diverse the water needs and the various agencies that you and Judah have to think about in forming the Water for the Poor initiative. This fund is kind of one-stop shopping, where you would go and you would articulate the needs of a particular company or country, of a particular area in that country, and that a board of some sort would make decisions on how water funds should be allocated through this particular water funding agent. This also would be a multilateral. It would work with other countries in the world that have similar type of programs. So once again, the Millennium Water Alliance was trying to create efficiencies and get the better and brighter people together to talk and compare notes. We also would like to extend that with the funding source and think through the possible creation of a U.S. water fund. Thank you.
Terrific, Mark. And Karen, if I could ask you very briefly, thanks.
I'm Karen Whitaker with the National Wildlife Federation, and I'd also just like to add my thanks to you and Judah for all your work on this. My question is, how do we ensure that sanitation stays in the dialogue and in the mix as we talk about clean water?
Hey, terrific. Thank you.
I think we just never have the conversation without putting the two halves of the equation. I mean, we're talking about an entire water cycle, and we need to be able to let people know that it isn't just the safe drinking water, it's what happens afterwards, and I think issues of stormwater that deal with other pollution and loss of life, and we, all of us, deal with it in a holistic fashion. And the more we do that, it'll be harder for people to lose sight, because you can't solve one ultimately without the other. Now, as you mentioned, I have to go back to Capitol Hill and not going to be able to join in the reception, for which I apologize, but there's lots of important networking I know that can go on here. But I wondered if there were 1 or 2 minute comments or questions that some people had, that we could just get a few more, if that's not in. Just if we could just do quick bang bang.
My name is Dan Dozier, and I'm with CDR Associates. And my question is, you're hearing here in this room even the interest that a lot of various players, stakeholders, have in this bill and getting involved. And the difficulty is, how are you going to be able to get all those horses going together in the same direction? And how is the State Department going to be able to accommodate all the interests of these stakeholders?
Okay, if you could hand it just right next to you.
I think that's what we're doing here. I mean, the plan is part of it, but for us, it is continuing to drive. It's continuing to be focused, and I think that that's we're going to have that alignment. We're going to make that happen. That's what you're part of here today.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Corso. I'm with Sister Cities International. We're an exchange organization that connects U.S. cities with international cities across the world. We're in 132 countries. And my question is focused on urban water in specific, because many of our communities that we work with have issues focused on access to urban, because they're in urban locations. And I'm very curious as to how you view your bill as addressing many of the issues that the urban populations will be facing, especially given the fact that by 2030, over 60% of the globe will be in an urban concentration.
You can't solve the problem without focusing on the impacts in urban areas. And I think there are different ways we can cut that to try and drive that point. The entire growth of the world's population between now and 2030 is going to, or 2050, I guess. We're talking about 2.5 billion people may be added. They'll all be an increase in the urban population. We cannot dwell exclusively in rural and agricultural areas. It is an urban problem, and it will be a part of this initiative. It is. I see us all being part of having an integrated strategy that includes that fact, that's where the growth is being driven, that's where the greatest health risks are, and that, ironically, is where there are more resources that are being spent right now in terms of getting the water, so that it's not that if we can somehow capitalize on the expenditures, the opportunity, the infrastructure is there, it's not insurmountable, but it's going to require more engineering, more sophistication. But I see it as very much a part of the overall issue that we're talking about.
That's terrific. Well, Congressman, we want this message and this topic to get as broad a distribution as possible. So I'm reminded that we have a VOA interview lined up for you immediately after this, so I think we will have to call it to a close. But I want to urge all of you to continue this conversation upstairs in the 6th floor boardroom. Second of all, send to me and to my colleagues here at the Wilson Center, and certainly to Judah in the Congressman's office, your ideas, and particularly about what works. And we'll get that up on the website along with the video of this presentation, so you can share these insights and the Congressman's comments with colleagues. And so won't you please all join me in thanking Congressman Blumenauer.
There you go. Without getting you. What could I say?
In the interim, until you come to conclusion about how much it's going to cost to how many and what he said,
Sorry, if we could just... Sorry to disturb. If everybody could go on upstairs to the reception. We just have another event starting in a moment.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. Can I get your card? Did I get your card?
Well, unfortunately, doesn't matter. On that end, the thing is, I think we need to ramp it up. I was working with ExxonMobil here in D.C. Recently, Europeans, we need to clear. That's fine. So I've been working with them for some time on a whole other domain. And this one just looks to be a slam dunk if we did that right. Okay. Sure. Yep.